How I almost destroyed my family at 17 and discovered something that changed everything forever. Sometimes, when I look back, it's hard to recognize the boy I once was. I felt like the world was spinning against me, that every limit was a form of imprisonment, and that no one understood me. Today, writing this, I realize that much of what I called a lack of love was actually a desperate cry for attention, and an unwavering stubbornness in listening to those who wanted to help me. Back then, I only saw the pain, the anger, the revolt, and the person who suffered most from this was my mother, Eva. I thought she wanted to control my life, when in reality she was just trying to protect me from what I was becoming. I was 17 when everything went completely wrong. My mother had remarried Rodrigo, a man I initially respected. He seemed calm and sensible, but as time went on, I began to see him as an invader. I hated the idea of sharing the house, the room, the routine, and even more. So I hated having to listen to advice from someone who wasn't my father. Meanwhile, the real one, Raphael, would show up every now and then with gifts, promises, and speeches, telling me I didn't have to accept this new family model. And I, hungry for approval, believed his every word. The truth is, I became an expert at manipulating situations. All it took was my mother raising her voice, and I'd run to my father, playing the victim. All it took was Rodrigo trying to talk to me, and I'd twist what he said to cause trouble. It was all a game, and I thought I was winning. The problem was, in this game, no one really won. The house became a battlefield, shouting, slamming doors, and resentful looks. I thrived on this tension because somehow it made me feel important. My behavior began to affect everyone. Rodrigo's son, Mateus, avoided me at all costs. My half-sister, Sophia, watched me like someone watching a stranger in their own home. I felt the discomfort, but pretended not to care. Deep down, I knew something was wrong, but it was easier to blame the world than to look at myself. My grandmother, Helena, always patted me on the head, telling me I just needed more freedom. And I clung to that to justify everything I did. My mother, on the other hand, became increasingly rigid, as if toughening up was the only way to keep from falling apart. I remember one particular night. It had been a nasty fight, the kind where no one listens. I screamed, said horrible things to my mother, and Rodrigo tried to hold me back as I slammed the door. I stayed out all night, just to prove that no one was in charge of me. Today, when I close my eyes, I can still see her face the next morning, tired, swollen from crying. And yet, she looked at me tenderly, asked if I was okay. I responded coldly, as if that gesture of love were weakness. Little did I know that that would be one of the last moments before my life turned around. The following weeks were chaos. I was completely blinded by my own emotions. Everything my mother said, I responded with sarcasm or provocation. When Rodrigo tried to intervene, I challenged him, just to see how much longer he could take it. The atmosphere in the house became unbearable. Even the silence felt heavy. And deep down, I knew I was the one fueling it, but I didn't have the courage to admit it. It was easier to blame my mother for being overbearing, Rodrigo for being invasive, and the rest of the family for not understanding me. I thought I was fighting for freedom, but I was actually digging my own loneliness. The breaking point came one rainy afternoon. I'd received a text from my father saying he had a gift for me, a motorcycle. My mother, of course, objected. She said it wasn't the right time, that I wasn't mature enough for it, and I exploded. She told me she just wanted to control me, that she had ruined my life, and that Rodrigo was a puppet. The argument got out of hand. I screamed, slammed the door, and ended up breaking a vase she loved. The sound of it shattering seemed to echo inside me. I locked myself in my room, furious, but for the first time, I felt an emptiness that the scream couldn't fill. In the following days, her silence was what hurt me the most. My mother didn't look at me the same way. There was no more scolding, no more arguing, just distance. Rodrigo also began to distance himself, trying to protect his children and his own peace, and I began to feel that somehow I was being swallowed by the weight of my own actions. But pride still spoke louder. I pretended I didn't care, that I had everything under control, when what I wanted most was for someone to pull me back. Only I no longer knew how to ask for help. It was my grandmother Helena who finally lit the fuse. She told my mother that the problem was her, that she was suffocating her son. That made my mother break down. I heard her cry, hidden in her room. I could have gone over there, hugged her, said anything, but I didn't. I stood there listening, convincing myself that she deserved that suffering. Today, I'm deeply ashamed of that memory. In that moment, I stopped being just a lost teenager. I became someone cruel, even without realizing it. A few days later, Raphael showed up. He said I could stay with him for a while, that things would be easier there. I accepted without hesitation. I packed my things and left without looking back. My mother didn't try to stop me, and that somehow hurt me more than any argument. I wanted her to hold me back, to say, "Don't go," but she just took a deep breath and said, "Go, Lucas. Maybe there you'll find what you're looking for." It was the first time I felt afraid of what I was doing. Living with my father seemed at first like the freedom I so desperately wanted. No rules, no demands, no disapproving looks. He treated me as an equal, as if I were an adult capable of making decisions. But I soon realized that in truth, he didn't care about my choices. He just wanted to use me as a tool to hurt my mother. Time showed that his gifts were traps. When I didn't meet his expectations, his tone changed. Criticism and venomous comments about Eva began, and I began to understand that there was something deeply wrong with that relationship. He didn't want to see me grow up. He wanted to see me as a weapon. Little by little, I began to miss my mother, the way she called me out, the food she cooked, even the arguments. I pretended not to, but each memory gnawed at me. Meanwhile, Rodrigo tried to text me, asking if I was okay, and I ignored him. One day, I received a photo. It was my mother in the hospital, her face drawn. The text simply said, "Stress crisis." It hit me like a punch. For the first time, I realized that my behavior hadn't just destroyed the harmony in the house, it had truly hurt those who loved me most. I tried to hide my anguish, but that night, as I lay in bed, I felt a weight I'd never felt before. It was guilt. Pure, silent, and devastating. I lay awake for hours, remembering every cruel word I'd said, every look she'd given me that I'd returned with contempt. In the morning, I asked my father to visit my mother. He refused, saying she was reaping what she sowed. And in that moment, everything became clear. I realized that this man wasn't my safe haven. He was the source of my chaos. That same day, I packed my things and left without saying a word. I took a bus back to my mother's house. When I arrived, Rodrigo opened the door. He was surprised but said nothing. He just let me in. My mother was lying down, pale, exhausted. When she saw me, she didn't say a word. She just cried, and I cried with her, as if all my pride had crumbled at once. I asked for forgiveness, for the first time, without trying to justify myself. I didn't know if she would forgive me, but I knew this was the first step toward change. From that moment on, I began a painful process of facing myself head-on. The psychologist my mother had tried to get me to see months before finally entered my life, and this time I went of my own free will. It was strange, uncomfortable, looking within and seeing how much I had hurt myself by trying to hurt others. Therapy made me understand how much I sought love through rebellion, and how anger was just a way to hide fear. Over time, I learned that being strong isn't about shouting louder or manipulating others, but about owning up to your mistakes and dealing with the consequences. It wasn't a quick process. There were days when I wanted to revert to my old ways because anger still felt comfortable, familiar. But every time I tried to deceive myself, I felt that emptiness in my chest, reminding me of what I'd lost. Little by little, I began to rebuild trust with my mother. It wasn't magic. We started with small conversations, brief moments, but full of sincerity. I finally listened, and she listened to me without rushing or judging. Rodrigo, little by little, also entered this new chapter. He didn't become my best friend, but he began to treat me with respect, as someone learning to be responsible. I learned to appreciate his efforts, and this led to a drastic reduction in our arguments. I realized that I often saw his authority as imposition, when in fact he was just trying to maintain harmony. Recognizing this was a huge step in my maturity. With Mateus and Sophia, it was simpler than I imagined. I began to understand that they weren't my enemies, just people trying to live their own lives. Learning to deal with Raphael was another difficult chapter. He still tried to lure me with gifts and promises, but I learned to recognize his intentions. It wasn't easy to resist, especially after years of manipulation, but I finally realized that choosing what's healthy for me is much more important than pleasing someone who only wants to exploit my emotions. My mother taught me that boundaries aren't barriers, but bridges to growth. Accepting this was liberating. My relationship with my mother was never perfect, and there are still tense moments. But today, I can communicate without resorting to anger or sarcasm. I've discovered that trust is rebuilt with small actions, with patience, and with constant presence. You don't erase the past, but you learn to transform it into learning. Today I can look at her and feel gratitude, not just anger or resentment. Family life still has challenges, but they are manageable, because now I participate consciously, not just react. The most important thing I learned on this journey is that true growth comes from within. It's not about showing strength or manipulating, but about the courage to face your own flaws. Today, I feel more whole, more human, and above all, capable of loving without trying to control. The wounds exist, but they no longer define who I am. My past shaped me, but my choice to change is what gives me real power. Every step I took toward maturity was a silent victory that no one could take away from me, and it's this sense of achievement that I carry to this day. Looking back, I realize my life was a tangle of misguided choices, misinterpreted pride and fear. Every argument, every manipulation, every night I slammed the door or screamed, all of it shaped me in ways I couldn't understand at the time. I was blind, trapped by my emotions and the false idea of freedom. But the truth is, freedom doesn't exist without responsibility. Only when I accepted my flaws was I able to see the path to rebuilding. Today, I can see my mother not as someone who limited me, but as someone who loved me intensely, even when I couldn't recognize it. I learned the importance of listening before reacting, of considering before judging, of choosing dialogue over provocation. I still feel guilty for many things I've done, and I may never be able to erase them all, but I've learned to transform that guilt into motivation to be a better person. Maturity didn't appear suddenly. It came gradually with each difficult conversation, each sincere apology, each gesture of care I accepted without resistance. Today, I see that being an adult means accepting responsibilities I once avoided, facing truths I once denied. My relationship with my mother, Rodrigo, and my brothers has improved considerably. It's not perfect, and perhaps never will be, but it's now based on respect and understanding, not fear or manipulation. I also realize that trying to control others only breeds distance. True strength lies in changing yourself. This learning process extended to all aspects of my life: school, friendships, personal choices. I discovered that growing up is painful, but every pain carries within it an opportunity for transformation. If I could speak to my past self, I would say, the world is not your enemy, and love is not a prison. Life doesn't have to be a game of manipulation to make you feel important. But I know I wouldn't have listened. Today, writing, this is my way of sharing, showing that change is possible, that even the most difficult behavior, when recognized, can be transformed. Overcoming adversity isn't about perfection, it's about self-honesty and the courage to rebuild what was broken. In the end, I can say I survived myself. I went through anger, pride, and emptiness, and came out the other side with awareness and maturity. I learned that respect, patience, and empathy are much more powerful weapons than manipulation. And, above all, I learned that true love isn't the kind you demand or manipulate, but the kind that gives itself, even when no one sees it, even when you make a mistake. Today, I am Lucas, but a different Lucas. More human, more aware, and ready to continue growing every day.